Okay, picking up where we left off, we're talking about how the smart technology, and almost all drives sold now, even SSDs, will keep track of, like, how it'll keep track of the temperature, it'll keep track of the amount of time it's been turned on, the number of reads that it has ever seen in its entire life, the number of writes, the number of times it had to go reread something over again because of a failure, the number of times it had to rewrite something. And if a spot on the drive went bad and had to remap that sector, that's recorded. So this is fantastic stuff for trying to determine if your hard drive is about to fail. Excellent stuff. So let's talk about failure. In the industry, they use a thing called mean time between failure. MTBF, mean time between failure. And the problem is, it's the numbers they give you are not normal numbers, and you can't really make any sense of them. For example, if I said we have 1.2 million hours of mean time between failure, 1.2 million, what does that mean? Well, if you kind of do the math, does that mean that this thing is going to last for 140 years? Is that what that means? Statistically, no. That is not what that means. What that means is the annual failure rate is going to be around 0.7%. That's kind of weird, isn't it? So mean time between failure doesn't actually mean what it says. It sounds like a lofty, big, monstrous number. Look at the number. Look at our mean time between failure. Ours is so much better than our competitors. No, that's not necessarily what that means. Okay, so talk about drive types. So when you buy a hard drive, there's different choices. For example, if I just go to the Western Digital, and look at their, well, actually, I just want to go to the stupid company page. Okay, fine. Oh, that's because I wrote driver. I didn't mean to do driver. So, so they come in different colors. I think their colors are actually, come on, behave. Hey, I got people waiting here. Now, come on. Oh, for goodness sakes, what's it doing now? I think I clicked it. So I'm going to go to products and find their storage thing. Storage platforms. I'm just going to pick on hard drives. And so they're not actually showing me what I want to show. Yeah, here we go. They have gold, and they have all these others, and they have, they used to have lots of cool colors. They had red drives and blue drives and all the rest of these things. The point is, there's a value brand, which is typically very high storage and low cost, but not that fast. That wasn't their concern when they did marketing. And then there's mass market performance. These are usually like high RPM with larger caches, and where performance is kind of sort of the key. And then they have one for corporate environment, like they have a drive specifically designed for doing network attached storage, where that's all it does for a living. It's going to be in a confined space, and it's going to be running nonstop. And those for like high reliability and a better warranty and very tuned performance, specifically for lots and lots of non-stop use. You can probably imagine at home, your hard drive is not. While you're watching this video, your hard drive is probably just resting on its laurels. It's not doing jack. But if you had that same drive in a server environment, yeah, you might be just using it non-stop. The typical warranty for a hard drive is about 2 years, which is not really all that great if you think about it. And yeah, their warranty is going to be, yeah, I'll exchange your drive for another working drive, but they're not going to help you with data recovery necessarily. Okay. So solid state disks on page 725. So the data is spread across many chips. It's all done in hardware. It's kind of sort of like a built-in RAID controller, because when you store something, it splits it up and sends it off to different chips, and then it recovers it. Okay. So traditional hard drives quote, sequential transfer rates, because it happens to be a really, really big number. And so when I'm comparing sequential transfer rates of a hard drive and sequential transfer rates of an SSD, the numbers are kind of sort of comparable. So hard drive people love to talk about the sequential transfer rate. The problem is that is not what gets used in a typical server environment. Except for a normal operation, even at home, you don't do large, huge copies like that a lot. Most of the disk stuff is tiny. There's some really cool software you can turn on that kind of instruments your hard drive. And I'm making this up, but I would imagine that the size of the file being read at any one time, average size of a file being read on your server is probably, I don't know, like 1K. I mean, I just made it up, but you see what I'm saying? They're not monstrously huge files, because you have lots and lots of small files and lots of large files, okay? But together. So the thing that's a better indication in a server environment, or quite frankly in a home environment, is that random at transfer, the random transfer rate. And that's where solid state disks just wipe the floor with. I mean, we're talking of differences of 100. You know, over here I've got 5 and over here I've got 500. Like, yeah, there's a difference. Of course, the hard drive manufacturers don't want to talk about that. Okay. So I mentioned that in the early days there was a read-write limit, and that a particular cell inside a solid-state drive could age over time. And so they figured out there was some sort of a finite number of writes before it would wear out. The problem is those numbers are getting kind of big. So it turns out that the average SSD will last about 15 years of continuous read-write operations. In other words, I write to every single cell over and over and over and over for 15 years before you hit that wear limit. Now, that wasn't the case at the beginning. When solid-state drives first came on, there was an awful lot of issues. Now, that's basically gone away. You know, in the lifetime of my computer components, that is not an issue. Just ignore that. Move on. Well, there's different type of memory types inside solid-state drives. There's one called a single cell. These are typically very fast, but not very compact. And then there's multi-cell, which is much more dense. Now I can fit more of them onto a small spot, but not quite as fast. And then there's triple cells. You know, and again, it's all about density and not necessarily about speed. But to tell you the truth, the speeds have gotten pretty doggone good. Behind the scenes, this is getting a little geeky, but you know, bear with me. Behind the scenes, when you erase a file, okay? I go and delete a file in Windows, or for that matter in Linux. All it's going to do is just remove the directory entry. It doesn't actually go out to the hard drive and say, hey, we no longer need this. So it just marks that part as being available to be overwritten later, okay? But the way the disks work is there's an oddity. I can't write to a particular, let's say, I don't know, pretend like this is a cell, and I want to write to one spot in the middle of a cell. I can't do that. I have to actually read the entire cell, make that change, and then write the entire cell back. I can't just pick one thing. I have to read and write in chunks inside the SSD. Now, hard drives are kind of sort of similar. I mean, except their chunks are a heck of a lot smaller because of those sector sizes. But anyway, so there's a thing called page clustering where when you do read and write operations, it reads multiple pages at a time, assuming that if I read a bunch of stuff, and since reads are kind of cheap, you know, they don't take much time. And if you turn right around and ask for like this cell and then the next one, you know, I've kind of anticipated what you're going to be doing. That really speeds things up. So what you're supposed to do is like pre-erase a bunch of cells. In other words, go out and find those files that are no longer valid, those spots on the disk that no longer point to an existing file anymore because the file's been deleted, and go and erase them. It's called trim. Trim basically is a feature of SSDs. We don't really actually need this in the spinner world. But trim is a technology that all of the SSDs you buy today support trim. It basically says, hey, I just deleted a file. You need to go clean up after yourself. And he goes, oh, okay. And it goes and does its thing. It just erases the stuff behind the scenes. So, Again, there's no real correlation on reliability with these guys either. I mentioned in for spinners how much it's being used or how hot it gets. There's no real correlation. Kind of sort of the same thing with SSDs. I mean, yeah, sure they fail, but typically they don't give you much indication. On page 782, there's a thing called a hybrid drive. And when SSDs first came out, they were very, very expensive. And so some of the companies decided, well, we'll take a spinner and we'll put a small chunk of SSD on the drive so that some of the stuff gets happened really quick. That idea is gone. I can't imagine you finding a hybrid drive anywhere unless you bought an old one off of eBay. Okay. Advanced format and blocks on page 729. So in the old days, sector sizes were 512 bytes. That's it. But to tell you the truth, we ran out of room. You know, the amount of space it took to record the number of sectors. Let's say I did an F-disk format, and I have a location here that's 32 bits long, and that's where I record the number of sectors that are on this drive. Well, to tell you the truth, as drives got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, I outrun that little location. I can't store all the sector numbers because there's more sector numbers that'll fit in a 32-bit number. So what they did is they switched over to what's called a 4K format. So a sector now is 4K in real life. But to make it backwards compatible, it lies to the controller. If you go to the controller and say, so, what's your sector size? He goes, well, my sector size is 512. It's lying through its ass. It is not 512 bytes. It's probably 4K. So this ability to lie is part of this transition between the small sector sizes to the large sector sizes. Okay. So there's one called native, which would be 512N, which means really, really use the native. There's one called 4K native, which means really, really use 4K. Linux can use, honest to God, real 4K. But older versions of Windows, like, you know, I'm installing Windows XP or something, it's going to be going to 512 emulated, where the drive just lies and says, sure, that's the size of my sectors. And just goes on about its business. Okay, interfaces. On page 730, we talked about SATA, serial AT attachment, SATA. Version 3 is 6 gigabits per second, but in real life of transfer rates and stuff, that's about 600 megabytes per second. Now you might think, well, that's pretty doggone good, 600 meg per second. Okay. But let me tell you, that's not fantastic. That's close. But the PCI Express with 4 lanes can beat that big time. eSATA, which is external SATA, so it was just it's just a revision of the standard to allow a plug that you plug into the outside of your computer. Maybe it could also include power, but I don't really usually see that much. PCI Express, which is of course the one that's inside the machine. There's kind of sort of no such thing as a PCI Express cable. Okay? It was never designed to be put into a cable. So if you're going to be using PCI Express, that means you're going to be plugging it directly into the motherboard. It can't be a cable going someplace. It's got to be plugged directly into it. So on the motherboard, PCI Express 3, has multiple lanes of 985 megabytes per second each. That's a lot. So if I had 16 lanes, I could get up to 15.8 gigabytes per second across there. How fast was that SATA guy? Yeah. Okay. Cool. The M2 standard is a mechanical electrical standard. It's the thing that we use when we plug SSDs directly into a PCI Express slot. So when you buy one of those things, it is a PCI Express and it's an M.2 format, because the M.2 format specifies the physical size, the mechanical connections, and the electrical connections. Okay. All right, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark.